Even though Artoo and Threepio have been with us right from the beginning in 1977, today we're going to discuss their very first meeting. We're also going to try and figure out what's behind the governor's message. Is it a trick? Is it blackmail? Or is it an honest cry for help? And we'll wrap things up with another iconic duo, Sidious and Maul, in the flesh, on Coruscant, hatching their evil scheme. All this and a lot of nerdiness in between as we continue our march through the Phantom Menace. Just a heads up, the audio is a little rough on this one. Had some technical issues on both ends, so thank you for your guys' patience. Let's get into it.
Okay, so what are your thoughts, man, on entering Anakin Skywalker's house?
Let's see. Well, I think it's such a like the last home, the last two places we've seen that have been, this is the place where I come from, this is the world I live in, is Jar Jar and the Queen, right? And so we went from like palace, this beautiful, like opulent, enormous space, to this like really like alien, like crazy, beautiful, like underwater city. And now we're just in this very simple, plain little slave hovel, and it's very small and very cramped. And you see when Shmi walks in the door, she has to duck her head down, everyone, because the doors are too small. So it's this, I think it's just, again, the visual storytelling here is just nice because it's just so different from everything else we've seen, and different in a way that emphasizes the story point, which is there's this place that's very different from anything that we've seen as an audience so far. Very different from what Padme's used to, and as she said earlier, this is a strange place for me, and she's used to opulent, throne rooms and stuff like that, and now she's in this really tiny little slave quarters, and it just, this is where Anakin and Anakin's like, oh, I'm home, and he's all excited, like, I'll save my place, and it's to him, he's just, again, it's normal, just like Otto Gunga was normal for Jar Jar. Like, he's so excited, he's like, oh, I'm so good being home, and we're like, whoa, this place is crazy, but it's normal to him, and the throne room's normal to Padme, but as an audience, we just get to see the contrast. We really feel the difference, even if the characters don't necessarily feel that, or in some cases, the characters feel it just as much as we do in Padme's case. And you kind of get the feeling like Qui-Gon's probably been places like this before, and it's not a mystery to him. So he's kind of like the seasoned veteran. Jar Jar's just kind of the wide-eyed kid who's just, everything's just, he doesn't really know what's happening. And Padme is really kind of the one really taking in everything and really observing the changes in the worlds around her that she's in. So just visually, I just like the design of it. And it's this, there's these, I think that the exterior of it is this grain storage place, I think in Tunisia, that they scouted it for the original Star Wars, but they couldn't find a place to put it into the movie. And George remembered those buildings, and he's like, we should go back to those. And so they revisit them for episode 1, and those became the slave quarters, just the outside. The inside's obviously a set. I think it's Leavesden or Elstree. I think it's Leavesden in England. But anyway, that's the first thing I think of when I see this.
Huh. That's really cool. I like the grain bin thing. Yeah. It was interesting last night. So I was reading that archives book again, and George was talking about how he in this particular case, he was talking about how there's two different mindsets, like when you're writing the story, he said you're so focused on the characters and who they are and how they respond and what they're going to do, things like that. Whereas like when you get into the storyboarding part, it's all visual. I thought, wow, what an interesting way to think about storytelling. There's so many different aspects to it, because you got to think of like, how does the writing process go? How does the visuals support that? Of course, the sound and everything else that goes into it. Wow, it was just kind of cool opening my eyes, and you bring that up with the visual aspect of this. And that's so important to movies and storytelling. Wow, that's so cool. The things that are so intentional, we've talked about it before, but just the things that are so intentional that we don't pick up on so much, but those small little things that help just tell the story, wow, that's so neat. Like I never would have even thought, like her ducking through the door, like, oh, that little move right there is telling how she's a slave, and just this isn't great living circumstances. Yeah, it could be worse, but it's not great, and just looking at it and the interiors of it, I mean, it almost reminds me aesthetically of Yoda's hut. Almost looks like it's made out of just mud, like someone just made a mud hut. And this little, like the shelves are just kind of carved out of the wall. Like, wow, I never would have thought about that. It's just a hut someone made out of mud for the slaves. Wow. And then comparing that to Padme's, holy cow, I never even thought about that. And it's cool because like I'm just looking at this now, like Naboo and at least Anakin's home, and if not Tatooine, they're all kind of roundish in shapes. Like everything's domed, doorways are round. So it's just similar, but you just drew my attention to that, thinking about that with the two different contrasts. Like, wow, there's Padme who's from the palace, all these round domes, but there's Tatooine, who's Anakin from all these round domes, but very different.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's going from like archways to these grand like marble staircases with these huge arched entrances, and these tiny little mud caked on the walls, kind of simple, very like Lars homestead, like the original kind of igloo looking thing. Yeah, it's it's a good point. Yeah, and they're both we become endeared to both of those, right? They're both, the audience eventually were both very happy to see both of those locations. Like at this point, the audience were new to Tatooine at this point in the movie. If we're starting the story in episode 1, we're new to it all, and so we're not really, Tatooine isn't this place we look back at fondly yet. But eventually, by the time we get to episode 4, it is kind of home base for the first part of the movie, and we kind of, even though it is kind of this rough place to live, it's this, there's this like there's something quaint and kind of beautiful about the Lars homestead and those domes of mud, and the desert can be a beautiful place. Just like driving across America, seeing beautiful deserts, landscapes, like, wow, even though it's kind of harsh, you wouldn't want to live here, but it's beautiful to look at. The twin sunset and everything. There's that beauty that Luke's looking off into the distance when he sees he has hope for the future. He's looking off into what could be, and it's beautiful. Sunset's twice as beautiful as the one we get here, right? We get two suns, twice the beauty of the sunset. And but yeah, you contrast that with another desert place, another desert planet like Geonosis when we get there, and that's all ugly shapes and spires and jagged like sharp edges and really like ugly kind of looking termite, termite colony inspired places where it's like it's still a desert planet, but aesthetically it's like, no, this is not a comfortable place to be. It's not a place where you can grow up on a nice quiet farm. There's a very distinct difference in those two places. And so even though it is kind of a harsh planet, there's a slight charm to it. And probably, we like round. We like, round is comfy, round is cute, and then sharp, pointed edges, those are dangerous. We don't like that. So when we get to the Empire, everything's angular. Like think of the Emperor's tower on the Death Star. It's like very so spiky and pointy, and so just visually, it's true what you say. Like when you go from stage to stage, going from script, make sure the words are right, make sure the dialogue, make sure you're getting the story across in the words and the screen direction, and then you go to storyboards, and you start thinking visually because it is a visual medium, and it's so fun, and it's so fun to see how everything, especially with Star Wars, like we talked about, everything has to be created from scratch. So you can't go anywhere on the planet to shoot these things except for, I guess, these grain storage areas in Tunisia. But you can, it's very rare you can go to these sets you have to build from scratch. So you might as well build the story into the sets and use that to your advantage. There's one thing in animation that they do that I really like, which is they do a thing called a color script. Have I talked about this before? So color script is basically a version of your story all laid out, but you just take certain storyboards, certain shots, and you just do these tiny little color, basically tiny little paintings where it's just very, very rough, but you're just getting the color of it. And you put them all on a big board, and you basically can see the story being told through color. So you start off in a friendly environment. An animated movie, it's like starts out kind of, there's warm tones, and it's kind of bright colors, and then at the point where the movie's sad, it's usually dark and blue, and like there's the color changes there. So you can kind of see how the color changes throughout the story to tell the story. And you might think that's kind of unnecessary, but it's a huge step in animation because you can use, when you're drawing everything, you're creating everything from scratch, you can use color to communicate your story as well. And you can really manipulate it in animation, especially. You can really change the lighting in a scene that wouldn't really make sense. It wouldn't really make sense in a real situation. Like, why is the light lighting turning blue? Why is the lighting turning red when it's dangerous? But it actually works a whole lot in animation. Like there's a moment in Mulan where she's been found out, and there's that moment where she might be killed. Like Shang is walking towards her with the sword, and it's like evening on a mountainside in the snow, so it's a very blue environment. But for that moment, the sky gets kind of pink and red as there's like this danger of he might kill her, and then he throws his sword down and he doesn't kill her. He chooses to spare her life, and immediately the sky turns back to a normal color. But for a second there, you're not quite aware of it. But when you really look at it, the sky is really kind of reflecting the danger of the moment. It gets red, not insanely, but they mess with that a little bit. So things like that. And so George he started in animation when he went to school, and so he knows these visual tricks of, it's important to put as much storytelling into just the visual part of it as you can, besides the script and the dialogue. And of course, he loves the visuals more anyway. So he does stuff like that, even though it's not strictly animation. There's a lot of those visual storytelling ideas in here that are just, if you take it apart, there's a lot of thought put into it.
Oh boy, yeah, that's really just this podcast has helped me really open my eyes to that. Wow, so much thought. Yeah, that's so neat. And it's true. Like this morning, we were watching a Clone Wars episodes. I was watching it with my boys, and it was one where, and speaking of George Lucas, Chairman Papanoida, his daughters, was so interesting because I mean, it's all, I don't want to say all, but most of it is told through the dark, or the colors. So for example, Ryan, he's my youngest, he was sitting there watching it, and actually I should say Emily, my youngest. Ryan's my youngest boy. She's my youngest girl. So anyway, she was kind of watching it. She's too young to even understand what's going on. But as soon as the lights went out, when the daughters go into their apartment and it's all dark, she just intuitively knew. I mean, she's 2 years old, just barely two, and she just started going, "Mommy, mommy," right away. This is creepy, It's like, wow. Yeah, all she saw was the color, It was just the beginning of the scene. It was just dark, and they were walking around like, It's like instantly she knew that. She didn't need to be taught that with these shapes and colors and things that we probably get manipulated with all the time. We don't even know it, And just paying attention to Anakin's room in his house, everything's round. It's like, oh wow, he's the lovable kid right now, and he's the one that we want to root for, and we're supposed to feel safe with. And oh, maybe I wonder how much I'm being manipulated by just the surroundings of that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, more than we think, for sure. It's definitely, we're not aware of it. We take it for granted, but yeah, like, why does she know when the lights turned off? Why does she know something bad was about to happen? It's like, because nothing good happens in the dark, right? Like, we think it's dumb, of course, but it's not. If you really think about it, it's not obvious why that would be the case, that we would know that the darkness. Actually, we're going to get to that in a couple scenes where there's a scene that takes place in the dark, and it's very intentionally in the dark. And it's like, why would we see this in the daylight? Well, it wouldn't make sense. But you don't really think about it when you watch it. You're just everything's kind of, all the input is just making sense, but all that's strategically chosen to facilitate whatever the story point is. And yeah, it's so cool to see a movie that does that, and does that to such a large degree and successfully, like Lucas does. But yeah, we walk in, and we I don't know. You have anything else you want to say before we get to 3PO? That's my first note. I have stuff about Shmi later, but I have stuff on 3PO. But anything else you want to talk about before we get to that?
Yes, I do. Okay, so here's a couple questions for you. Number one, I've always wondered, and I have the subtitles on, and it didn't do it. But there's a line when they first arrive in Anakin's home. Anakin's talking to Padme, and he's saying, "Oh, you want to see a droid I'm building?" And you hear Qui-Gon introduce himself to Shmi, and Anakin says something the exact same time Qui-Gon does. Do you know what Qui-Gon says? My hunch, I've listened to it over and over and over again. I think he says, "I'm a Jedi," but I can't be sure because the point is Anakin, and I've always wondered why they did that. Do you have any knowledge into that, or like what he says there?
What moment? 'Cause I'm pretty sure the only line he says is, "Your son was kind enough to offer a shelter." And does he say anything after that?
Yeah, I think he does. He says it at the exact same time Anakin says something, and you can't tell what he says. It seems very intentionally like blurred out, because clearly the focus is on Anakin. And, like you hear his line clear as day, but if you pay really close attention, you can hear Qui-Gon
Weird.
kind of mumble something.
Oh, he does say something there. Oh, wow. What does he say? I never noticed that.
The only thing I can think of is he says, "I'm a Jedi."
Oh, I don't think he says I'm a Jedi. I don't think he says I'm a Jedi, but, like, he does say something because he doesn't, he, because the Jedi thing is revealed later where, like, Anakin says, "You're a Jedi Knight, aren't you?" He's like, what makes you think that?" I don't think he's saying that, but he is definitely saying something. Wow, I never noticed that before. That's gonna drive me nuts.
No, I've wondered and wondered and wondered for so many years because she goes, "Oh," she kind of goes, "Oh, okay."
I
And
never
I've
noticed
always
that.
wondered if he did that very intentionally to show because Anakin doesn't hear it. He's busy talking.
Oh, now I gotta look at the script, the screenplay, and see what he says. Yeah.
Because you're right, he doesn't reveal it to Anakin until later. But there's almost this look of like he and Shmi already know this.
Interesting. Oh, maybe. That's weird.
Oh shoot, I was really hoping you'd answer my question.
No, I've never noticed that before. I've never caught that. I'm wondering, let's see.
It doesn't seem like an editing mistake to me. It seems very intentional. Like it seems like George left it in there for some reason.
Hmm.
Like if it was a mistake, you think he would have cut the sound or just reshot it real quick or something. But
Yeah. Oh, is the sound? Does it not cut the sound? Because at least from but I don't have headphones in for the movie. But it sounds like his audio drops out at that point. But you said it's still there. You can still kind of hear him. Okay. Really interesting. Okay. Wow. That's gonna. Well, as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna have to figure that. I'm gonna do a deep dive and figure out what it is. I'll text you like, this is what he said. This is what I think he says. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Sorry. Wow. That's so cool. I have no idea. That's cool. Yeah. I have to look at the screenplay. I have to look at the storyboard, see if anything is there. That's cool. I love little things like that.
yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, yeah, it's fun moments like that. So that was my first question. Second thing, so right when you go into Anakin's room, like right, you kind of see R2 just barely starting to come through that little doorway. There's this
Hmm.
little statue there, and I'm wondering if you know what that's supposed to be because like it's right next to his little like I don't remember what you call it. It's like a little ball thrower.
Yeah, those little things. I remember those. Yeah.
Like it looks like the Star Wars version of that for Anakin. But I was wondering if you knew what that little statue is. It kind of looks like Maz Kanata.
Yeah, I remember everyone saying, like, "Oh, is there a statue of Maz Kanata in Phantom Menace?" I don't know what that is. I never really looked into it. I don't. What I will say is, I think it only shows up in that one shot, so I don't think it's important. Um, but eh,
I don't know if you knew a history behind that
it
or
kind of looks like maybe like what a Jawa would look like if it didn't have its hood on or something. It's just got those two eyes, and that's about it. Yeah, I have no idea what that is. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see because I know. Yeah, a lot of the props were. It's funny because I think I'm not sure. Yeah, always every time I see this scene, I look at that thing that R2D2 walks by. It looks like one of those things that you'd catch the ball in, or I can't remember what those things were called. But in the very next shot on the wall, then there's very clearly one of those because I think you guys had that, or someone I knew had that growing up. I remember seeing that even as a kid, recognizing it, going like, "I know what that is. That's not Star Wars. That's not from the galaxy far, far away. That's from like Walmart." And it's just one of those things where they probably thought people wouldn't catch it, but we did. Um, but yeah, so I don't know what that stuff is, but I guess since they are pulling stuff. Here's my point. I guess is that since we know they're pulling stuff from the real world and they're just kind of repainting or something. So maybe it's an actual piece of art. It looks kind of African to me, an African sculpture. I do like African sculpture, and it does look a little bit like that. Um, that little statue. So it could be that, or maybe it was carved specifically for this. It was made directly for the movie, or it could be from something else. I don't know, but I'm sure there's a whole Reddit page about that thing and the history of it. We could probably find out, but I don't know off the top of my head. Sorry,
gotcha. Oh, okay. I was wondering if it's like an Easter.
I'm 0 for 2. Sorry.
Yeah, oh man, let me down today. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Anyway, that was all I had. But your notes on 3PO. We get our first introduction to 3PO. Threw me for a loop because it was like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness, Darth Vader made 3PO. That just rocks
Yeah.
me. I thought it was cool. I didn't have a problem with it. But what are your thoughts on it, man?
Well, it's I never really I don't really remember a time before knowing that. So it never really occurred to me that I think, by the time I saw this movie, I don't think I was old enough to kind of make the connection that Anakin was Darth Vader because I hadn't seen episode 2 and episode 3 hadn't come out yet. And so the connection between Anakin and Vader isn't like such a huge point in the original trilogy. It's not hammered home enough for like a little kid to probably get it. So I don't think I even understood that they were the same character um, by this point. So it never bothered me because I've always kind of grown up with it. I've always known That's always kind of been 3PO to me. He's always was something that Anakin made. Although I think I talked about this where I wasn't entirely certain that 3PO and whatever this Man of Wires thing, I wasn't entirely certain they're the same character at first either. If I remember, I think it took me a while to realize, oh, it's the same character. Because when you're a kid, again, I'm not really listening to dialogue. So when they say 3PO or C3PO, I'm not really paying too close attention to the names really. I just like the guys with lightsabers. That's all I'm really looking at. But eventually I realized, oh, it's the same character. We're talking, I'm really little. I'm probably like, 3-4 years old, thinking this. But yes, it didn't. I remember hearing people go like, "What? Darth Vader made 3PO?" And I thought, oh yeah, that would be kind of a weird thing to realize because I'd never experienced that. Have you seen this? There's one of my favorite Legends comics is this really short story of I think it was called, what was it? I think it was called Tales of the Jedi or Star Wars Tales, something like that. Star Wars Tales, and it was a comic series in the 90s and early 2000s, and I think they started publishing it kind of in anticipation of Phantom Menace, so it kind of came out around that time. And I think one of the first issues of it, there's a scene, there's a little story that takes place during Empire Strikes Back, and it's about what Darth Vader visiting Bespin, and he's there, and it's kind of like he's waiting to surprise the rebels, surprise Han Lei, and he's talking with Lando and all that. And there's a moment, and it's kind of highlighted a moment in the movie that I never really thought of, but when 3PO gets destroyed, he gets found out, or he finds the stormtroopers and they shoot him, or he finds the Imperials, whoever, and they shoot him and he is blown to pieces. But they send it back to him. Or when Chewbacca tries to take he tries to collect 3PO, right? And he has them in the little junk, the bin. But then when he's in his cell, he's given, or they let him keep 3PO. He still has the 3PO to mess around with. And so the story has this interesting perspective where they've captured him, and then they show Vader like, oh, the Wookiee had this droid with him, and in Vader, there's this cool panel of Vader holding 3PO's head in his hands, and it cuts back to a flashback of Anakin discovering this protocol droid pieces in a junk pile, and he actually builds them. He's like, oh, I should build it. So it's this really interesting flashback. So it's this interesting, like, Vader holding 3PO's hand and like realizing who it is, and there's this. I'm not sure if I like the story point now, but at the time it's like Vader shows is like they're basically were saying, oh, we're just gonna junk it, throw it into the trash basically, or melt it down or something. And Vader goes, no, just give it back to the Wookiee. Like there's a small moment of kind of compassion from him where he's like, nah, I kind of like this droid. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to tell you why, but just give this back to the Wookiee. So I'm not sure I agree with that. It's like, I don't know, Vader probably would just destroy 3PO. But it's just a fun idea. It's just a fun little scene that's like part of it. It happens within the story of Empire Strikes Back. Anyway, it's just a fun little, I don't know, I guess if you hadn't read it, I guess I just ruined it for you. I read I basically told you the whole story. But it's a really small little thing. I always kind of like that. I just like the image of Darth Vader like holding this golden 3PO head, and it just cuts to a young Anakin holding a 3PO head with all the wires. And it's just the same image. It's just kind of a cool, I don't know, I always liked that story.
It's a neat image. What do you call that? Foreshadow or something like that. Yeah, that's cool. I've always really liked how 3PO was made by Vader, because it really makes that family dynamic. Like Artoo and Threepio, they're the family droids. They're the family pets.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because everyone's like, oh, the galaxy's too big for that. This is making the galaxy small. And I said, well, this is a story of a family. Of course, it's going to be their droids. And I just think that I like that touch. I think it's kind of neat. It never bothered me. It was just like blindsided, like, whoa, I never thought about 3PO being made, especially by Vader. That was just kind of a neat thing. And to see, because again, George, I was talking about, this is the story told from the droid's perspective. So it makes total sense. It makes total sense to me. It doesn't come out of left field. It doesn't seem like it's shrinking the galaxy or whatever. I'm a fan.
Yeah, I like this scene too. I think it doesn't, the whole thing works. And it's the first time Artoo and Threepio meet too. So that's a significant moment, and I don't think it's an accident that the first time the first shot of entering Anakin's room is not Anakin and Padme, it's Artoo. walking in, and so it's kind of from his perspective, as you were kind of talking about. And there he is, he sees 3PO for the first time. So the whole scene is kind of R2 and 3PO kind of dominate the scene, and Anakin and Padme are kind of off to the side a bit because R2, he looks him up and down, says, "Hey, you're naked, by the way." R2 always throwing out the attitude, and actually we understand the joke because we've seen TC-14, right? So we understand that this droid isn't supposed to look like this because that's the same droid that was serving drinks to the Jedi earlier, and so it's like, oh yeah, he's supposed to have coverings like she does, and also we get to we understand like what Anakin says. He's a protocol droid to help Mom. You can see like, oh, this is the droid that helps. He serves drinks, and it's you can see how like, oh, this is the type of droid that would be helpful to Shmi, because we see her later on. She's cleaning little computer parts or something, trying to make some extra money, I guess. And so, being a slave and also being a mother, it's like, yeah, a droid like this would be helpful. A pit droid, not so much, or astromech like R2-D2, not so helpful. But because we've seen TC-14 and now we see 3PO, it's like, okay, I can see this is sort of he is that kind of butler droid. Like he's basically his sort of the stereotypical British butler. That's always kind of nervous and like, oh, I guess that's kind of where the British accent kind of comes in and all that. I can't remember. I can't remember if George described him that way, but I've heard and like somewhere in the behind the scenes, he was talked about as being kind of like that kind of nervous, British butler. That was kind of in a lot of comedies and the sidekick in a lot of movies. So it's like, oh yeah, you definitely kind of see that.
That's neat. I've never thought of him that way, but you can totally see it. He fits that very well. Yeah, I like it. I also thought it was neat how two thoughts. One in the Tartakovsky series, how they make that one brief scene where they give each other the droids, where she grants him R2 and he grants her 3PO. I just thought that was a really nice touch because it plays out either way. They switch droids, and it was just kind of a neat like, here's my wedding gift to you.
Yeah, I did like that moment too. Yeah, it was cool to realize that. Yeah.
It was really neat too because they explore that a little bit in Clone Wars, how Anakin really cherishes R2, so much so that he's grown attached to him. It comes from Padme, versus like, oh, here's my astromech. But if that, it's the connection to Padme, it's just deeper, And maybe he's not as thrilled about 3PO because he's kind of annoyed by 3PO.
Well, yeah, and I never thought about that, but yeah, he and R2 go through quite an experience at the end of this movie, right? Like he and R2, almost die together. Like they go through battle together, and so that have that connection for sure. That was like his first big, R2 was part of the group that took him away from his home and like showed him the galaxy that he always wanted to explore, and then his first big adventure kind of was with R2. So it makes sense. But yeah, it's true. I never really quite thought about that, but you're right that R2 would mean so much to him, not just because R2's a great character and everyone loves R2. Anyone who meets him kind of develops an affection for him, but that he's his wedding present from his wife, and that yeah, so you'd have a connection with that, and it's connected to Padme. Yeah, it's true. I never thought about that quite that way, but that's a cool point.
Yeah, I always like that. I like that scene. So even if George had no hand in that particular scene in the Tartakovsky stuff, I mean, it's clearly played out at least a little bit in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Where he becomes attached to R2. I mean, you clearly see that by the beginning of Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, and he was there at his wedding too. He was like one of his groomsmen, I guess, or one of his. I think 3PO was probably best man, but yeah, maybe he was a ring bearer. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, that'd be very fitting for R2. So I appreciate that, but I also appreciate somewhere, and I couldn't find this. George, I'm pretty sure it's George, said that 3PO was not built from scratch from Anakin. That, yeah, like you said, he was found. He had an original maker, and Anakin kind of rebuilt him, repurposed him, sort of thing. And we get a very, very small hint of that in the Clone Wars episodes, where he talks. You get a really small glimpse of that, and in the episode where Cad Bane is interrogating 3PO, and
oh, really?
One little line in there where he talks about his previous, like pre-Anakin time. Is a real quick line.
Oh, really? I don't remember that.
Huh. Really cool. And I remember hearing that George had always kind of planned that, because I thought when I first saw this, I was like, whoa. So whenever 3PO says thank the maker, he's thinking Vader. And that kind of blew my mind. Like, thank the maker, Vader? That's crazy. Wow. but it's actually not quite that. Like he talks about, yeah, 3PO came from another person somewhere. So anyway, I didn't know if you knew about that, or this is kind of a cool comment.
No, I didn't. I mean, I guess I'd seen that that Clone Wars episode, but I guess I never really caught that line. But I do. Yeah, I can't remember exactly. I think it's in the one of the commentaries or something where George talks about how 3PO was sort of like it's like a kit. You could, obviously protocol droids, there's tons of them in the universe, in the galaxy, so they're mass produced, but you can kind of, order, send away for parts and stuff, and you can kind of make your own, like, piece it back together. Like Anakin didn't like, handcraft like all the different shapes, all the different pieces. And 3PO, he just kind of found a bunch of, protocol droid parts lying around that was kind of just discarded. And he kind of like, oh, I'll replace this washer with one I found over here, and this screw, I'll put another one in there. I found another one that fits. Kind of just that's very much like the kind of gearhead kind of mentality that Lucas had. Because he was into cars and all that and machines and all that. So it's you piece it together with different. It's a custom build, but you still, someone is building a car. They're not, shaping every little piece of the engine. Like they're ordering parts and they're getting, different things put together. So it's kind of that idea. You still say you made it, you still say you built it, but you didn't do everything. You didn't you didn't make the metal. So, but yeah. Because I know people criticize, like, how does a little kid make, a droid? It's like, well, yeah, again, he didn't fashion every single wire. He had put them together from existing pieces. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is neat. That's a neat nod to who George is as a gearhead. That's a good term for it. Yeah. So one thing I like about this scene is that, kind of along those lines, I feel like this is the first time we really get to see Padme act her age, hanging out with another kid, looking at his toys. Because Padme is supposed to be what, 12, 13 in this episode?
14.
14?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, and Anakin's 10, right? Like 9 or 10, somewhere in there.
Yeah, 9, I think. Yeah.
Pretty close. And this is one scene where it's kind of like, oh, she is a kid,
Yeah.
She's like, wow. He did a good job at capturing that, because you don't see that much for Padme in this episode. I mean, she's the queen. She's got to put all these responsibilities on. But here she can let down just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat that Anakin's the one that can do that.
Yeah, and again, he's making her smile, like he's, showing her, you made this droid, and he's kind of silly and, funny. And again, it's in this crazy, threatening, scary world new world that she's on. There's this little bright spot where, like, this kid, this woman, and this droid are very friendly and very welcoming. And so, yeah, she can smile and she can feel a little more comfortable. And Anakin's bringing that out of her. There's this, I don't know if you've ever had this as a little kid, but like I remember having this where I was like a little kid, but there were, like, I think I had neighbors, or there were girls a couple years older than me, and I really wanted to impress them and make them think I was cool because I liked them. And I was like, especially if you have a crush on them or you think they're cool, you're like, oh, look at this thing I did. You're trying to impress them, and so they kind of, they tolerate you because you're a little kid. But yes, but I remember I had I had like fool's gold, pyrite, probably from like Estes Park, some rock shop or something. And I was like, I have real gold. And, I was telling that. And I remember my mom totally like ruined it. She walked by and he's like, he's lying. That's not real gold. It's, I'm like, Mom, you're ruining it. You're ruining my game. Get in the way of my game. You're a horrible wingman. So I kind of look at this scene like there, Anakin's like, I want to show this, in his mind, are you an angel? His really beautiful girl. He's like, oh, I want to impress her. And so he's like, I'm going to show you my really cool thing that I made. And she's, kind of entertaining it, but also he's like, oh, it's actually very impressive. You successfully put a whole droid together. And he's, he forgot to put the eye in. Last thing, the final touch, puts the eye in. And he comes to life. And it's like, yeah, it's a cool moment. And of course, there's Anakin, again, slightly bragging. It's still cute at this point where he's like, I built a racer. I built a pod racer. I'm so cool. It's still cute at this phase. But again, there's a little bit of like, okay, you can see where that little arrogance kind of comes from. But yeah, no, it is a cool scene for sure between Anakin and Padme. Even though they are kind of not quite the stars of the show for that scene, they still have a little bit of moment, a small moment there that's really cool.
Yeah, it is cool. I mean, really, the love story starts here. You know, it's not all episode.
Absolutely.
It's here. It's here, and from that first moment, are you an angel? I mean, that's when it starts. And it's fun. You know, it's kind of fun to see. It's weird because we're like, oh, these are kids. You know, like it's
Yeah.
not quite like Han and Leia where we all understand that, we all relate to that. This is kind of like, okay, that was that weird, little kid crush. um, but still, it starts here. I like that. Yeah. So do you? I know George has said something about this, but I don't remember what he said. Do you know why he chose to do coverless 3PO? Was it? I remember seeing it somewhere in this archives book, but I cannot recall. Do you remember?
Think, yeah, I remember him talking about it, and in doing research for this, I remember coming across it, and I don't remember exactly what he said. I don't think I think it was mostly an aesthetic choice, just to show, you can't be just to show there's a progression before he gets to like the gold covering, kind of just to show that he's still kind of like a work in progress, still kind of uh, a home project that Anakin's working on. Um, but I don't know of anything. I don't know of any big. Not to say that there isn't. I don't remember reading any sort of big reason why, like huge story reason why he did that. It's more just to show a progression of the character, I guess. But I don't know. What do you did you find it? um,
I can't find it, but I remember going, huh, it was kind of neat. You know, I mean, yeah, I remember it being nothing earth shattering. It wasn't like, oh, this
yeah,
is what turned Anakin to the dark side.
yeah, it wasn't like that,
Like
but
this is foreshadow or whatever. Um, I think it was just yeah, if I remember right, you're right. There's something about this is just subtle. It's kind of fun, but yeah, it is neat because I do know there is a little progression with 3PO. It's a very small
yeah,
arc between in the prequel trilogy. You know, he gets this from ashes to gold kind of thing.
yeah. And there's a scene I wish we got in episode 2 where you see him get his coverings, where he starts out as wires, and then later on he gets his halfway through the movie or whatever, he gets his covering, and it's Padme who puts him on. So it sort of kind of establishes Padme and 3PO's connection, which may lead to her taking him in during the Clone Wars. I have to look into that scene a little bit more, see what it would have been. But that scene definitely would have blown my mind as a little kid, like, because I remember going, "Oh, they're the same character." It would have. I remember watching episode 2. I don't remember this, but I think I watched episode 2 and I went, "Oh, so 3PO was the guy in the first one, like the one in episode 2 where with his coverings. Oh, he's the droid we saw before. Oh, I think that, and so that would have made more sense to me if I had seen him actually get the coverings put on. But um, anyway, but yeah, there's a progression of 3PO we get, and so this is the first step in that. But great character, we love him, and yeah, it's always fun to. Yeah, I just love seeing that moment between R2D2 and 3PO being introduced. It's just a cool little, again, it's not a huge big moment in the movie because if this is the beginning, we don't know what that means, them meeting. But in hindsight, you're like, oh, that's so cool. Like, this is it. This is where the friendship started. But first 2 characters we ever saw in Star Wars. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's a neat homage too. You know, I'm not sure this floor is entirely stable.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to call back to the episode 5. Yeah, it's just fun, and you always feel for 3PO, because he's the guy who's like actually concerned about the real things, and he's calling it is, and everyone just dismisses him.
Yeah, he's the one character who's allowed to be scared and upset about the stuff that we would be upset about, if we were in this world. But everyone else they're the heroes of the stories. They got to be brave, and they can't be going, I don't know if we should go in there. He's the one who always has that attitude. So,
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I agree. Yeah, and then when he introduces himself to R2, that's just neat. What a good way to capture just the personalities of the two, where 3PO is all business and R2 is just you're naked, man.
yeah.
And then use that little laugh, that little R2 laugh that he does.
Yeah.
It is just again the genius of Ben Burt and the sound guys to
Oh, yeah.
take R2, and you totally know what he's saying and feeling. And it's just amazing to me every time.
Yeah. The fact that R2 is a character that is such a miracle. It's so crazy that even worked. It's like it's a trash can with lights blinking on it and makes little robotic baby noises, and we're like, "Hey, I love that guy." It's like, what? That's not a thing. That's not a thing. That's not a character. But it is. It worked somehow.
Yeah. Then we move on, unless you had other thoughts.
No, we can move on to the governor's message.
Yes, Mr. Bibble. So, what do you think? What? Okay, okay. What are your thoughts here? Is he telling the truth, or is he being forced to say this?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it?
And
Hmm.
obviously, we're meant to not know, and that's part of it. But I'm just curious on your take. Do you buy it? Do you not?
I think having looked at the screenplay, where we talked about this before, where there are certain lines that are omitted from, I think it's from Sidious. Um, so when he says the death toll is catastrophic, yeah. Um, we do know that they are killing people. So, there is a death toll. I don't know how large a death toll has to be for it to be catastrophic, but um, yes, I think he's no, because he, it's interesting because he's definitely the Sith use his transmission to trace them.
I was going to
Um,
ask about that.
and so it's used for that. Did he know that it was going to be used? Maybe he was duped. I don't think he knows. I think if I had to guess, based on the information we have from the movie and like certain things in the script that were left out, that make it a little more clear that there actually is bad stuff happening on Tatooine. People are starving, they are dying, and they're going through the officials one by one and killing them off quietly. So he's, at some point he's going to be next. There's I think what I think is happening. Again, this is totally me speculation. This is not based on anything George said specifically, but I think piecing all the stuff together that I can find, I think the idea is that this is an honest message from him, but he doesn't know that it's being used to. His intentions are good, and he's not willingly he hasn't been blackmailed into sending this message. I think it's just they've, without his knowledge or something, they've traced it or something like that. I had to guess, but 'cause I don't think there's enough implication in the movie to say like, oh, he's like, it's not touched on later that, oh, I sold this out. It doesn't really talk about it, so I don't think there's enough evidence to say that, oh, he knows he's leading them into a trap, kind of, or he knows that they're going to trace them through that. I think it's a genuine cry for help, but unfortunately, it's being used to trace them, I think.
Mm, okay.
But that's totally just my guess. I don't know.
No, I was curious on your thoughts because they really leave it really open. Yeah, I'm very similar. Like I always thought he really means this, but I've always wondered was the Newt Gunray or whatever holding a gun to him and saying you need to make this transmission, or if he was kind of sneaking around and it was part of Maul's plan, to use this cry. Like he knew it was coming and it was going to be genuine. It wasn't like Maul was forcing him to do it, but he uses it. Yeah, so I was curious on.
Yeah, although Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon both are like, oh, this is bait. It's like and Obi-Wan's like, it's a trick. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tricky one. I think, but we do. I mean, at least from now, this could have been a change because there were lines cut from the script. So maybe George cut them because he decided they weren't true anymore. But there are lines in the script, in the screenplay, where they talk about, yeah, we're going to start starving people. Actually, in this scene, there's a line that Bibble originally said that he is not in the movie, where he says that they've cut off all their food supply. So they're dying. And not only are they dying, they're starving. So it's a horrible way to go, obviously. And so that's really a disaster. But so maybe that was cut because George decided that wasn't true anymore, that they weren't killing the people. But then, no, I think they are, because Padme says later, our people are dying, Senator. And like, I think it is, I think it's still, the threat is legit. The threat is legitimate. The threat has to be legitimate in order for the story to work. So the threat is there, obviously. I think Qui-Gon says, either way, whether Obi-Wan's like, what if it is true, and the people are dying? I think it is true. I think it's both. It's like, it's a trick, but it's also, he's being serious when he says we're dying, death toll, starvation, all that. But it's being used to trick the Jedi, I guess, at the same time. I think it's both, but we'll see. Further research required.
Yeah, yeah. But I was just curious because Obi-Wan, yeah, he's so quick. This is a trick. Send no reply. Like he doesn't even give them a chance to respond. Just boom, nope, don't do it. And I was just curious on how that played out. And that's I'm not sure it's a criticism, but it would have been interesting. I think it would have been nice to have felt the threat a little bit more of the Trade Federation. I understand why George took that out, wanting to stay for children and stuff, but reading this guy's book and hearing what you said, how George, there were originally plans to show suffering from the Naboo people. We were going to see some of that. It wasn't all just speculation, because I feel like it removes the threat a little bit. But it would have been, I think it would have helped solidify the threat of the Trade Federation a little bit had they shown at least a little bit. Like even if it was just a quick pan over like concentration camps where people are just kind of laying on the floor like moaning or something. I don't know, but
Yeah, sort of like the Ryloth arc in Clone Wars, stuff like that, where it's just very brief. You see the people captured in a bad situation, but you don't really linger on it too much. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, you chose to go the mystery route. It's like, well, is there a threat? Is there not? How desperate is our situation? I will say they it's interesting. Because we in this very next scene we swap threats basically because like the threat has been, well, people are dying in Naboo, we have to get back to Naboo, and that never really goes away. But that was the most immediate threat until this next scene, and all of a sudden things shift. But obviously we're not that scene yet, so we can still talk about this one. But yeah, and the conversation between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Yeah, again, it's just there to, like we talked about the scene before where it was the sandstorm. It's just, the problem is, well, we're stuck. Oh, and okay, now we don't have money to get the thing to get us unstuck. We're still stranded here. Oh, there's a storm, so that's going to slow us down even more. And now it's like, oh, and things are getting worse on Naboo. So it just, their situation just keeps getting more and more dire, and things keep getting more and more hopeless. And so that's kind of what the function of this scene is in the script. Overall story is just to let us know, oh yeah, we're, like Qui-Gon says, either way we're running out of time. So just things are not looking good, and with each progressive scene, things keep looking worse and worse. But yeah, any other thoughts before we go to the next one?
No, I'll remember it. I'll ask you. But here's a question I've always had: why? I have some speculation on this, but why do you think Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon doesn't just sit down and try to meditate to reach out to the Jedi for help instead of using communications? Kind of what Luke does with Leia in Empire Strikes Back. Is it my hunch? There's a couple hunches here. One is George always said, like, these guys aren't invincible. They can't do whatever they want. And so that's one piece of it. And two, I was wondering if it's a distance thing, because they're really far from Coruscant, whereas like Luke and Leia, when they do it, they're right next to each other essentially. Or is it what Obi-Wan, or not Obi-Wan, Yoda and Mace talk about, where it's like in episode 2, it's time to inform the council that our ability to use the Force is diminished. Are we seeing that playing that too? I'm just curious your thoughts on that. Like, why don't they just reach out through the Force, try and say, hey, we need some help, send other guys, Do you have any thoughts on that? No,
yeah, I'm trying to think of other instances of that happening, where the Jedi communicate over great distances, because I can't really think of many off the top of my head. I don't, other than Luke and Leia. Obviously, there's a connection between Jedi who have strong bonds with each other. Like, so between Master and Apprentice, we see Anakin and Ahsoka do that on the Geonosis arc, where Anakin can kind of like feel each other. These, like, he can, at that point, they've already established enough of a connection that he can, he thinks she's still alive. He believes she's still alive because he can kind of feel it and sense it. Obi-Wan and Vader in episode 4 is like, Obi-Wan or Darth Vader says, I sense a presence I have not felt in a long time. And Yoda, I mean, well, because Yoda, he senses Qui-Gon and Anakin connecting in episode 2 when Anakin's killing all the Tusken Raiders. So Anakin kind of Yoda picks up on that sort of connection with both of them. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of a specific, like, Jedi communicating for distance for how, like, we have, I guess there's Plo Koon and Ahsoka in Clone Wars. When they go to rescue him and Wolf and all those guys. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I mean, the most obvious answer is just, this is not a thing where it's not a problem with, it's not an in-universe thing. It's just the plot thing. Like, we need them to be stranded. We need them not to be able to communicate with anybody. So, but with an in-universe reason, I don't really have an answer for that. I haven't really thought about that specific way the Force is used. If I'm honest, I don't really. Um, I'm really striking out here. I got no answers for your questions right now. This round because I just but I do I have thought about it a little bit, but not enough to kind of do a deep dive and research because I know there's some people kind of there's a discussion. There's sort of a debate about can all Jedi communicate? Can they all send? Do what? It kind of goes to a different question, but it's related, which is how much can Jedi sense the presence of others? Is it more and can it only happen if you already have a relationship with that person that you kind of created, you've connected, you've developed a bond, and therefore you can sense the presence later, or can they sense anyone's presence at any given time? Or is it they just sense the strong presence of the dark side or the light side? So it's I don't know. I do want to delve into that more and try and figure that out, and see what the movies say, see what Clone Wars says, see if Lucas has said anything about it. But I don't know off the top of my head. So sorry.
Yeah, I was really curious. No, that's okay. I was really curious because you think the darkness is showing up. This is like the first time we really, at least to our knowledge, the dark side is manifesting itself. It's starting to reveal itself. And Obi-Wan picks up on it right away. And then as we've talked about, Qui-Gon starts to pick up on it. They don't have words for it yet, but they're like, okay, something's coming. Something's happening here. But we don't, as far as we can tell, the other Jedi have no idea,
Yeah.
Even, and that seems to be played upon in episode 2, where they still, like that scene I was just talking about with Mace and Yoda, where they still are both kind of like, we're missing this. And that's why the dark side is able to fly, because we're not doing well. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of always been my hunch, because you think like you see a scene like this and they would, like, especially Yoda would sit down and just be like, I'm sensing something, and he'd delve into it. Or eventually, if Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon aren't returning, then they would try to think through that, Well, I guess it's secret, huh? I don't know. It says in the crawl that Chancellor Valorum did this secretly. How secretly? I don't know. Maybe how many Jedi actually know about this?
Yeah, true. Is it secret to the Jedi or the Jedi in on it? Yeah, who knows?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about because I was wondering. I had never really thought about the Jedi's ability to use the Force being diminished until episode 2. Again, that 10-year span that things have gotten worse. Maybe it starts here. I don't know. I mean, because obviously the dark side makes its first play here, but it's not a galaxy spanning problem yet. Like, it's not separatists. It's not there. It's just one planet at this point. That's a problem. But yes, I don't know if maybe their powers are not diminished yet, or maybe they are. I don't know. I don't know. I have a lot of homework to do. A lot of things I got to research after this. Little things like what does Qui-Gon say there, and also big issues like what are the Jedi? What are they even? What is sensing? How can they sense each other? Connect with each other? That's probably something I should know. I need to figure that out. But yeah, interesting.
I've always been curious about that with that here, and I mean, I definitely realize that this era is the Jedi not in their prime. In fact, this is the end of them. And we're supposed to feel that. We're supposed to feel they're not at the top of their game. But I was just curious on, and if you'd heard anything or what your thoughts were. And
well, it's interesting because it's like the Jedi are not in their prime in terms of their control, or they're blind, right? They're blind to a lot of, as Yoda says, blind we are if creation of this clone army we could not see. Impossible to see the future is. Like, there's a blindness there, but they are in their prime in terms of because George has talked about. It's interesting. There's the idea of that the Jedi are the kind of to blame for a lot of the stuff that goes wrong. Lucas actually doesn't talk about that much. A lot of that comes from Filoni, and a lot of that comes from other sources. And so I'm sort of starting to kind of walk back a little bit that idea as I look into it more. It's like I'm not sure if Lucas is really saying the Jedi are really as bad as you kind of think that they are now. It's kind of more popular to think of them. I think because whenever he talks about them, he doesn't say that. He doesn't really talk. He doesn't talk about Qui-Gon being the best of the Jedi. George has never said that. And I'm not saying that he isn't. I'm just saying it's one thing where he talks about Jedi. Whenever he says like a Jedi should be this, a Jedi should be that, he never singles Luke or Qui-Gon or any other Jedi out as being that. He just says a Jedi is selfless. A Jedi does this. And he talks about the Jedi being in their prime in the prequel era in terms of their, they've been doing this. The Jedi Temple and the way they've been training Jedi has been going on for thousands of years or something at this point. And so, in terms of their, like, he's talked about it specifically in reference to the lightsaber battles and their skills. Like, we want to see a Jedi in their prime fighting Darth Maul. Like, they're really skilled, really, they're very practiced and very adept at that. Whereas Luke and Obi-Wan episode in the original trilogy, they're, and Vader, none of them are at their height of their abilities. So it's a weird thing, like where the Jedi's power, they're in their prime in that sense. And it's not like Mace Windu, it's not like Yoda and Mace Windu are these off people. It's just they have blind spots, and so like they're diminished in that way too. So it's a weird. That's another thing. I need to tighten this idea down and figure out what it is exactly that is going wrong with the Jedi. Because I think sometimes I kind of get it wrong, or maybe I might be going a little too far into fan territory where actually maybe Lucas is not saying they're as bad as we think they are sometimes. Like maybe that it's not so much the Jedi failing Anakin as that Palpatine. It's just that Palpatine's influence, that he is an extra ingredient he added to him being added to the equation is what caused Anakin's downfall. That if he was taken out, then maybe the Jedi and Anakin would be fine. But they are blind. So there's a weird little, I don't know, it's a weird little balance in there somewhere. I'm trying to figure out, because I've thought about that recently. I'm like, I think there's something I might be being influenced by other ideas that aren't coming from Lucas when it comes to my view of the Jedi in the prequels. So anyway, that's kind of I've just been thinking about that recently. So I need to rethink that. But
that's a big
yeah,
one,
so
because I feel like it plays
yeah,
into this, for sure.
yeah, for sure.
Because at bare minimum, I'd say like Palpatine, what's the word you want to say? Takes advantage of the Jedi where
Oh
they
yeah.
are right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems very clear. But to what extent? I don't know. Yeah, I would definitely not say that the Jedi are all to blame for what happens, but at the same time, there is a piece here. Yeah, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say on that. So
Yeah, I've started to do a little more research on that, and I'm gonna try and figure out it. Gonna try and come up with a more solid theory about that, because it's based off of what Lucas says. And watching the movies again, I need to watch the movies again because I haven't watched them in a while. And look specifically for that kind of arc, that thread throughout the whole plot. Anyway, sorry, I don't even know. I totally went off on I'm on a tangent of a tangent of a tangent at this point. So my brain is not smart enough to remember where we started at. So I'm sorry. I'm sure you asked me a question and I forgot to answer it. But
no, that's okay. I was just asking, like, why didn't they reach out to each other, kind of thing. And you answered it, but it was just that
Gotcha.
down that road a little bit. So yeah,
Not too much.
I think it's fantastic because it matters. So
we'll see. Yeah, I'm excited to get into that. Well, yeah, the next scene I have a lot of stuff on, because this is our first look at Coruscant, which I love that this is our first look at Coruscant, because the scene sets up the threat of the Sith, and what's so cool about this is that now we finally see them in the flesh. So the threat is real now, and in more ways than once. They're not just phantoms and ghosts. And Lucas has talked about that. This scene was specifically put in there so that you didn't think just that Sidious was a ghost or some virtual creation. Like, it wasn't like the Wizard of Oz, where it's actually there's this man behind the curtain. He's not as scary as he looks as the image appears. He is a real person, real flesh and blood threat. They're now we see, we were introduced to Darth Maul last time, so now we see both of them. They're in the world. They're real, and they're able to cause harm directly now. They're not just behind the scenes, and the threat is also real now in the sense that they are now actively hunting the Jedi. And so this inevitable confrontation between the two is brewing, because we've had these two contrasting groups of, these hooded figures, right? When they were first introduced as these hooded figures, and then you see one that we've come to know them, we've come to trust them, and these other ones we've stayed shadowy, mysterious, but they're linked in many ways. More ways we'll find out later, but just visually, they're both in robes. There's some connection between these Sith and these Jedi, and there's both two of them. There's a master and apprentice, just like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. So, and now we see that we started the ball rolling, and eventually they're going to meet each other, because Darth Maul talks about if the trace was correct, I'll find them quickly. And so now, oh no, they're hunting. So that's, again, this is what I was talking about earlier, where each each scene just makes our situation even worse. And so now we're delayed on Tatooine. The sandstorm ruined it. Things are getting worse in Naboo. We really got to get going. We don't have any money to get off of Naboo, and now we really can't stay here because we're being hunted. They don't know that yet, but we as the audience knows. Okay, time's really running out now because now the Sith are going to hunt the Jedi, and we don't get a lot of history of the Sith in Star Wars, but our first kind of hint of it is here where Maul talks about revenge. So apparently the Sith and the Jedi have been going at it for a while, and so there's some bad blood between them, and so it's our first hint as an audience is to going, okay, there's some connection between the two, and it's like a kind of evil twin version of the Jedi where it's like, no, there's some bad blood, there's some sibling rivalry. I guess like they're probably connected and they split off at some point, and now they're going back after him. But
has he talked about any of that history at all between them, or I know there's a ton of legend stuff and even stuff the Clone Wars, anything on like George?
Yeah, the big bubble burster that he the big kind of letdown that he dropped on a lot of fans was that there was no great war between the Jedi and the Sith. That wasn't really a thing. Kind of like the Old Republic thing, where it was like hundreds of Jedi Knights versus hundreds of Sith, duking it out. He said like that didn't really happen. Like there was always just the two Sith. His whole point is like there couldn't really be an army of Sith because the Sith don't work well together as a team. It's always the whole rule of two thing. Is not really a rule so much. It's not like they're trying to follow. It's just that every time there's two Sith, one wants to kill the other and take his power. So there's just no way that that's going to turn into a society of Sith that are working together and all happy with each other. So that's just it wouldn't work. Just looking at the character of what a Sith is just wouldn't work. Whereas a Jedi, that does make sense that there be many of them. In terms of what is the history of their conflict between the Sith and the Jedi, I need to do more research on that. I'm not exactly sure. It's not, for story purposes, for the purposes of the movies, it really just boils down to the Sith want power and the Jedi want peace, and those are at odds. And so the Sith just see the Jedi as being in their way. So it's not, it's funny. Palpatine is really just, Sidious is really just evil personified. Doesn't have a lot of like, what's his motivation? Like he's just evil. He just wants power, and it's not super nuanced. Doesn't need to be. But I know there is more of a history, especially if you go into George's drafts of New Hope when he was really trying to figure out what the story was. There are a lot of ideas thrown around as to like what was the history of the galaxy that brought us to this point. And of course, we'll get into like Darth Plagueis stuff later. That's like the most we go into like the history of the Jedi. But as far as we know, the Sith have not been seen for, and we'll learn this later in the movie, but the Sith have not been seen for a millennium. And they're thought to be extinct. And so they've been lying low for a really long time. But other than that, other than there not being a Sith Jedi war, and that being a huge, not being hundreds and hundreds of Sith, there's always just been a couple here and there. That's really all that's George. I think that's all I know about that George has said. I'm sure he said more. I'll have to do some research on that.
Okay. Yeah. I'll do some homework too. I was just curious. Yeah. If you knew off the top of your head. Okay. Very good. And you had another note you were going to say?
Yeah. Just to start. I want to let you talk too. I just have a couple things. So Sidious says that the Jedi will be no match for Maul. And he's like, "You've been well trained, my apprentice. They'll be no match for you." And he's been right about almost everything so far. He's kind of been one step ahead of us, of our heroes so far. So his plans seem to work out so far in the movie. And so they haven't been disrupted quite yet, at least in any big way. And so even when he was surprised by the Jedi, things worked out. And the Jedi are really at a low point right now. So we're worried as an audience because this comes right after we've seen the Jedi fail for the first time, right? And then the problems are starting to stack up. And so the good guys they misstep, and the bad guys are just ready for them to do that. The bad guys are taking a step forward as the Jedi are kind of stumbling. And so there's blood in the water, and the sharks are coming, So, and a reason I like that we see Coruscant for the first time in this way is like, where did the Sith finally show up for the first time? And the story is what's their home? It's a dark city. It's the opposite of the bright sunny garden where our heroes came from, right? So it's just that opposite of thematically opposite. And so our first introduction to Coruscant is at night, and it's as a home to evil. That's our first impression of this place. And so we don't really know it's Coruscant. We don't know it's Coruscant yet. Actually, it's interesting that the planet gets introduced twice. This is sort of like a secret introduction to it, where there's not a lot of information in this. Scene's very short. It's still kind of mysterious. But later on, we get like a proper introduction to it. And if you're not careful, and I think I might not even made this connection as a kid to know that it's the same place. Like very, very young, I don't know if I knew this was Coruscant in this scene. Because when we see Coruscant again, it's like, oh, it's daylight, bright and shiny. Again, the first person we see on Coruscant is again Sidious, but this time it's Palpatine, and he looks all friendly. And it's just interesting. We don't realize yet that our heroes are trying to get to this place of evil. Like this is actually where our heroes are trying to get to. So I just like the kind of, like the heroes in the dark, and we're kind of in the dark in the audience at this moment. But looking back on it, you kind of see, oh, this is all kind of hinted at early on.
Wow, I never thought about that. What a contrast! Yeah, just the two coins or two sides of the coin of Palpatine. Literally portrayed, like physically portrayed, obviously of him, but also the surrounding. At the center of it all. One's in the underbelly, one's on top. Wow, that's so interesting. One's at night, one's at day. Well, that's so cool.
Yeah. Oh, it's a classic idea. Like nothing good happens at a city at night, right? That's where all the shady stuff happens. That people moonlight as other things, as Sidious does. And then in the daylight, no, I'm the friendly chancellor here to help. So it's a very classic motif. But yeah. So, but anyway, I just love this scene because it's our first good look at Darth Maul too, which is cool. And yeah, it's like one of the only times he speaks in the whole. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Wow, and he's so menacing. Now, didn't someone come in and dub his voice? Because that's Ray Park there, but I mean, it's not his voice, right?
Yeah, so the voice is Peter Serafinowicz is his name, I think, and he's kind of a famous. He's well known. He's not just some random voiceover guy unknown. He's done a lot of stuff. And I think he'd had more lines in the trailers for Phantom Menace than he did in the actual movie. Because there's these trailers where he does this like Sith like fear preys upon the fearful or whatever, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I remember that.
Yeah, I discovered those way later actually. Because of course I wasn't aware of those when it came out. I was too young, but wasn't surfing the web at 2 or 3 years old or how 3 years old, however old I was. Anyway, but yeah, and so his he was a voice, and I'm not exactly sure. I think it's the only time he ever did Maul's voice was in this movie, or maybe he did some video games or something. But maybe did Battlefront. I don't know. But then, of course, Sam Witwer kind of he took over in Clone Wars. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. Peter Serafinowicz, I think, is his name, and he's been in a lot of other things as well. But great voice.
Do you know why? Do you know why they did that? Why they dubbed it and didn't go with Ray's?
Oh, I think Ray kind of has a higher voice, and it's not kind of softer. And he wasn't really an actor; he was more of a stuntman. He was a stunt performer who wasn't really into a lot of acting. And it's his next role, I think, is as Toad in X-Men, and he doesn't speak at all in that movie. And then he plays Snake Eyes in G.I. Joe, who is famous for not speaking. So he doesn't really. I guess talking is not really his thing in movies. But I'm not sure if it was originally known whether they would dub him or not, but it was kind of like a Darth Vader situation where David Prowse, who played Vader, had this really thick Scottish accent. Actually, I don't think it was Scottish. It was just very, very thick, maybe like the north of England, really thick accent. I think there's a similar situation with Ray Park where it just didn't quite fit his voice didn't quite fit the character. And maybe he just didn't have the range as an actor to get to that kind of low, threatening, deep voice. Maybe he just didn't have the acting chops. I don't know. I just know that if you listen to Ray's voice, yeah, it's a little on the higher end of the spectrum and not quite as threatening. So maybe that's why.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious because they did that in the Solo movie too, where Sam Witwer was in the lines when Ray Park is actually on screen. So I was just wondering. I remember hearing that and was just like, wow, I wonder why. I've never heard an explanation. I just knew that was kind of the case. But yeah.
Yeah, I know Peter Serafinowicz has kind of been. I know he's been talked about being kind of disappointed that he wasn't asked to be Maul again in Clone Wars, but oh well. which I understand. Like that would kind of stink. It's like, oh, but I did it. I'm Darth Maul. But oh well.
Yeah.
I love Whitwer's performances also.
Oh man, yeah, he
Yeah.
was great. hmm hmm Yeah, well, I love that scene. I mean, Darth Maul is one of my favorite bad guys of all time.
Oh yeah.
Man, I mean, my boys were this morning. Ryan, he said the same thing. He's like, my favorite Sith is Darth Maul.
Yeah, me too. As a kid, I was obsessed with him.
mm, I mean, he's just such a presence on screen
Hmm.
instantly. Very first hologram, right away we knew it, And I mean, he probably has the least amount of screen time out of any Sith ever. But man, if you don't,
Yeah, it's true.
man, so epic. He's got one of the strongest presences for sure. And I
Hmm.
just, wow, my hat's off to George again, just for designing or like affirming the character, the designers, Doug Chang, all those guys. It's like, wow, so cool.
Yeah, and a big um another thing I'm really grateful that George did was when they decided to bring Darth Maul back, that they didn't just try to make him, they didn't just try to milk the silent, creepy animal kind of Maul. Like it wasn't Phantom Menace. They didn't try to just like extend that out and just like they actually developed him as a character. Because at first it was very weird. It's like, why is Darth Maul talking so much? Like, why is he so animated and so all crazy and all over the place? And it's like that's a huge risk, especially with a character as beloved as Darth Maul. Is he and Boba Fett kind of have that similar effect where they're not on screen very much, but they're and they don't really say much, and so the mystery is kind of what makes them interesting. So to take that character and all of a sudden make him very verbal, make him very active, and turn him into more of the um not this like kind of silent brute, like kind of now he's more sort of like the scheming mustache twirly villain now. It's like that could be disastrous. That could be off like a horrible decision, but it worked in a weird way. And I remember my mom walking in while we were watching Clone Wars one day, and I was like, "Oh, she's like, "Oh, there's Darth Maul." I'm like, "Yeah," and she watched it for a couple seconds, and she was like, "He's talking too much." And then she like left the room. And I was like, I know, but like you gotta see the progression. It makes sense. It works." Um, but it's just crazy that they kind of made a whole different character, um, as he would be after going through what he went through. It's like that changed him, and it changed him in a way that actually works and didn't make him less interesting. It just made him different. And it didn't ruin this version of Maul. It just he became it just progressed his character, and then to see how he ends up and what they did with him in Rebels was also interesting to kind of see that his arc and in Solo and all that stuff. So yeah, it's a crazy how he survived, how he became kind of this. He had everything going against him, right? Like a new Sith, like you can't top Darth Vader. Like what are you trying to do? This is dumb. But then he shows up and everyone's like, whoa, this is like, even if you didn't like the prequels, everyone liked Darth Maul. Everyone thought he was cool. And so that worked. And then so it's a working formula, and they change it. And that's classic George, just like totally throw a curveball at everybody, and it works somehow. So he's a really interesting character, really cool addition to the universe. I loved Darth Maul as a kid. He was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, definitely. My brother and I mean, oh, he was my brother's favorite. He still is.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
choreographed all the fights and stuff. It was great. Yeah, I know. It's just so cool, and I love that scene. Man, I mean, just yeah. I mean, you just start to feel the threat, And I like something I appreciate in this scene in particular is how Palpatine is very confident in Darth Maul. He's just
Mm.
very confident. Like, you're well trained, you're ready for this. Like, now's the time. And I'm glad to see that because he is a threat in this movie. Whereas like kind of other Sith, like I mean, they're definitely a threat, especially with Vader. But like with Dooku and stuff, like you feel that, but like Darth Maul is the only one that we've seen, I guess, aside from Vader, in Revenge of the Sith. But you actually see him killing a Jedi, like a
Mm.
master level Jedi. I mean, I know Qui-Gon's not quite a master, but on the council, but he is, he doesn't kill the Padawan, he kills the master. And I just think that's always kind of struck me. Like Darth Maul was a very legit Sith, because sometimes we tend to think, oh, the apprentice, here's the apprentice. How could he kill the master? Like that just seems weird. And how does the apprentice of the Jedi kill the other apprentice?
Yeah.
Of the, but I just like that. Like Palpatine's confidence isn't necessarily misplaced in Darth Maul, and I just think that's kind of neat. Like with Dooku, you feel a threat there, but not quite as threatening, you know.
Yeah, well, Dooku has a very specific and interesting role because he's in the public eye. He's out there to be like the face of the Separatists, but he's a Sith and no one knows it. So he's basically doing another Sidious. He's doing what Sidious is doing, is being out there and hiding in plain sight. Whereas Vader and Maul are both, they're just in the shadow. They're there to, they don't have a dual identity. They're just there to do one thing, just to kill everybody. You know, that's they're there to be the threatening and awful, you know, horrible, terrifying monster. Where Sidious and Dooku are more, they're there to kind of win people over and seduce them and to be like, oh no, come to our side. We're doing good. Things are great over here. You know, that they have that aspect to them, where they're kind of a kind, and then Vader and Maul are kind as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good way of phrasing it. Because I like that. I like that a lot. You know, we're used to the villains kind of being the guys who lose all the time. You know, and I like how, I mean, technically Darth Maul loses in this movie, but just barely. You know.
Yeah.
And I like that. It's not a the good guy just triumphs. You know. It's like, no. I mean, he takes out Qui-Gon, and that's a big statement.
Well, yeah. By the end of this movie, we start out with 2 Jedi and 2 Sith, and by the end of it, we have 1 Jedi and 1 Sith. Those were 2 original pairs. You know, one master survives and 1 apprentice survives. So it's an interesting. Yeah, they both. So even though there's many other Jedi, but our 2 main ones that we're following, there's a huge cost to that defeating Darth Maul. Where it's like, yeah, it doesn't really feel like a victory. It's sort of like a tie, it really at the end. And actually, in many ways, Sidious comes out on top. But yeah,
I like that. You know, I like that. There's teeth behind Darth Maul. Is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
You know, like, like what you're trying to say. There's teeth behind these Sith. They are real. There's a threat. It's not just a phantom. It's not just a, here's the bad guy of the day. You know, he's gonna lose in a few minutes. You know what I mean? Like, no, there's real stuff here. So, and what an introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so cool.
For them in the flesh. Yeah, we've already met them in phantom form. Yeah, it's interesting to see that. Just, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it's just, or if it's just kind of the way the story played out. But I like how in the first time we meet Darth Maul and Darth Sidious together, Darth Maul is standing up. You know, he's kind of the higher form. You know, like clearly Palpatine's still in control, but he's standing up and Palpatine's seated, and hologram. But in here, they're on level playing field. Both times you feel like they're both. You feel like they're both master apprentice. Like, you don't feel like Maul's overshadowing Sidious at all. He definitely clearly is the powerhouse and the leader. But I just kind of think it's kind of fun to see. I don't know, just a little more, just the threat of both Sith. And I don't know if George had anything behind that, but I just kind of appreciated both of that.
Yeah, totally.
Together, and Darth Maul is just as looming of a threat. And yeah, it's kind of neat.
Yeah, even when he's, you know, the shortest one in the room with the Trade Federation, he's still terrifying, you know. Yeah. It's just those eyes, right? Those like animal, like cheetah eyes that just like stare into your soul. They suck. So terrifying, but so cool. Next time, we're going to do a deep dive into the dinner with the Skywalker scene. A scene that's probably not high on the list for favorite scenes in Star Wars for a lot of people, but it has tons of cool ideas and concepts in there if you're really paying attention. I'm definitely looking forward to that one. Thanks for listening as always.